Hello everybody, this is Desmond of Desmond Ascension, and today we'll be discussing the main issues with healers in Project Ascension, what I think of them, the biggest problems, and then some possible fixes or additions that we could do to solve my perceived problems and simply make this game a little bit more interesting for healers. Now, before I get into anything else, I will be going into detail on some things that people might not like. These are just possible solutions. You are open to your own opinion on these things, so just note to self, you are open to your own opinion. With all that being said, let's start talking about healers. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is, and once again, sorry my audio quality is not fixed yet, sadly. Audio quality is always going to be this way, but I did put more effort into this, so let's go straight into what's the important bit. So, for an overview of healers, for those that aren't super into this sort of thing, or they don't get all the roles that healers do, for those that, don't play healers very much, or for those that just, don't play healers the way that most people expect you to. So the first thing, obviously, is to heal people. Your job is to keep people alive as long as possible. Just make sure people aren't dying out of nowhere. Now, the second one, which is one that I see very, very common, even though, especially in Wildcard, which I'll talk about later, there's a problem with, and that is giving the party buffs. So, obviously a lot of, especially in free pick, a lot of people pick their own buffs, but it's often shown as I guess a stereotype that the healer is the one that's meant to give buffs to everybody, and it's meant to run all the big raid and group-wide buffs. So often, they are the ones that are being asked to bring as much buffs as they can. In Wildcard, it's a bit different because, you can only get what the game gives you, but still, often or not, they want people to bring buffs, even if those buffs aren't insanely good. That's the main thing they want people to bring, other than heals. The third thing, and this is probably the one that most healers fail the most with, although I can see why, this is providing extra coordination or callouts. So this is, in a dungeon, calling out when mechanics are going off, making sure people aren't running the wrong way, making sure people are getting out of frickin' mechanics, like burning on the ground and stuff like that. And that's one of the big things, is that not only do you have to juggle, making sure buffs are up, making sure you're healing everybody, but you're also expected to be the person to basically babysit and tell people where they should and should not be standing. Mind you, if you have a really good group or a really, confident group, you can probably get away with not doing this part, but this is just something that, throughout my experience, throughout the experience of other people, this is one of the huge things. And finally, for the healing role, we have providing some benefit when not healing. This obviously can go into the buffs, or if we're not doing buffs, some people tell healers to DPS, or tell them to, do a lot of CC. Obviously in Wildcard that's a little bit easier / harder depending on, how you're set up. But that's really all, is an overview of what healers, the role of healers is. Your job is to essentially provide support for the team, heal people, and then just make sure everything around it, the group, is working well. You're essentially supposed to be the glue of the group. So now I'm going to get a little bit more specific, talking about, healers in Ascension, talk about the specific specs, in which I have chosen 4 specs to talk about because these are the most popular, regardless of how good they are or not, though there are only 2 specs I think are fairly good and popular at the same time. So the most common I see is HOTS and Holy, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I'll talk about HOTS in a minute. So Holy is your direct healing, I guess, spec, you can call it. It's your direct healing one, and that's what you're doing is your job is just hitting off heals, getting lots of crits, and just essentially giving big direct heals over time, whilst trying to make sure you don't run out of mana, sometimes doing DPS when you have nothing better to do. Probably the most straightforward build to play, because you're literally just, click on character, press button, know which button to press when, and then maybe if you have like an ability that protects somebody, press your cooldown. We go to DPS Holy Healers. So these are builds that spec more into the DPS side of things, specifically like Smite, and Consecrate and stuff like that, and their main deal is to DPS, but then as soon as stuff goes super wrong, they'll hop into a healing role if they need to. And I'll talk about this later, because this build specifically is one of the few builds in an archetype I will call the hybrid builds, and that they need a big fix, these hybrid builds, because they're not very viable. But enough said, let's get on to the other two. HOTS builds. Now, HOTS builds are by far the most popular in terms of the raid / dungeon groups, and this is because what the build essentially does is it applies HOTS, healing over time effects. And what you're going to be doing is essentially you're just going to keep casting these spells and making sure your HOTS are on whoever needs to be. You have a few direct healing spells, generally that tends to be Chain Heal, and a few other, there's also Rejuvenation, I believe, which will give you it's Regrowth, which gives you a direct heal and then applies a hot. And essentially this is where you mainly get it from, some shaman stuff as well, but essentially this build is just keep the healing over time constantly going, and there's a few minor builds within there, like trees and spam a lot, and there's a bunch of them, but HOTS in general is the archetype of the spec. Finally, we're going to go on to the last one, which is one that you only really see either in a glass cannon build in free pick, or you are seeing it in wildcard, and that is base nature. So base nature essentially tries to do what holy does, which is direct heals, but with the nature type. This mostly comes from shamans, because they are the ones that have all the direct healing ones. The only big ones that are different are Riptide, which is a hot, which you run in HOTS builds, and Chain Heal, which is their only huge and really good direct heal. Some of their other heals are pretty good, but they're not like insane. In this build, like I said, unless you're setting it up for like a Chain Heal glass cannon, the build just does not work very well at all. But it is still popular in wildcard, because in wildcard, you're given random abilities, you only have so many, so might as well use them. So, I'm going to go over free pick problems right now. Free pick has a lot more issues, because, everybody can choose what they want, so there's less build diversity. And I'll talk about that in a second. This is where a lot of people don't like going to free pick, because, obviously there's less diversity in the builds. But I also think it also shows a lot of the biggest problems with the setup of healers in general, and I'll talk about these problems starting now. So, a lack of good REs for different playstyles. So, huge thing about Ascension is that we have random enchants. I can show you them here, and these random enchants can give you things such as crit. They can make it to where you can have special stealth stuff. You have improved auras. You have some that basically just act like talents. And then you have others, which I can show you right here, will do huge things, such as Drain Soul now does huge things. You have Titanic Mutilate, which allows you to, it changes entire abilities and how they work. You have, where is it? Crazy Cultist, where any warlock spell, any offensive warlock spell can just cast a random warlock spell for free. And this is where the big issue comes in, is that these are where you get most of your good stuff. And just for examples, I will show you Holy right now. A lot of these, like I said, are just like small buffs. It's when you start getting the legendary that you start seeing issues. So, in the case of these, we have, some that are really cool, like we have Righteous Zealot, which allows you to smite and heal friendly players. We have Growing Light, which allows your Beacon of Light, which is one of your best abilities, to heal people for 20%. And it extends the duration of the beacon for a little bit. You have, when you cast Direct Heal, that doesn't you gain a stack. It decreases the cast time of your Penance, Holy Fire, and Smite, so essentially it just gives you faster casting. Greater Hero Flash Heal also heals targets affected by Renew. This one's probably one of the worst ones. And then there's a few others in there. Atonement's not a bad one. But essentially the big issue is that all these builds really only go to one thing. The only one that really does okay as a hybrid is Atonement, and what I believe to be the best one, Righteous Zealot. Because what this does is it will hit somebody, it'll smite them potentially, and then heal all nearby allies. But there's only so much you can do with that. So, past that, we have a lack of diverse options / ideas. Essentially, we only have 3 major healers in the entire game. We have Priests / Paladins, which are holy. We have Shaman style, which is direct heals in nature. And we have Hots, which is Shamans and mostly Druids. And as you can see, 3 versus the, upwards of hundreds of DPS combinations, even tanks, you can still get up to, 5 or 6 different builds that at least semi-work. This one, you can make 4. You can make 4 in the entire game that are fairly decent at high levels of play. And as I just said, hybrid rules don't work in general gameplay because there are no really good REs set up for them. Whether it be just, REs or the talents as the way they have them set up. There's no reason to play a hybrid build outside of maybe Holy, because there's a few decent REs for it. But other than that, you really don't do anything with them. Like, you're just wasting DPS potential and heal potential for no reason. And now we're going to go into the last one for this, and that is going into wildcard problems before we go on to my solutions. So it's very hard to get an efficient healing core in my hold on. It's very hard for me to get a healing core in wildcard because there's so much randomness. There's nothing you can do about it. If people want to be random and you cannot get a proper healing core, well then you're screwed. In my case, I got my best holy hot, I got one of the best heals, I got the best holy heal, and then I got one of the best holy damage spells with one of the other best holy spells. Which is just freaking crazy. So, first things first, getting a full core for this stuff is awful. It's annoying. Then, we go on to REs again. They're not very viable. They're even less viable because you cannot get the build you need in order to maximize them. So every person that's a healer is, unless you open up a perfect core like mine, you're on the back foot. Always. You're always on the back foot because there's nothing you can do. aside from, just constantly re-rolling and hoping you get the abilities you want. So, not only are you now barely able to make the healing build to begin with, at least to a competent extent, you can now barely use your best in class enchantments even if you get part of that core, because you don't have the full core. And we start seeing the problems with wildcard, which is what I'm playing right here. Thankfully, I'm very lucky. Lack diversity, yeah, there's only 3 in the whole game. And there's lack of incentives to play healers. Healers are one of the most annoying classes to play, or specs to play, because people don't treat you very well, just socially. You're often, even though you really have good queue times, that's about it. You compete with healers in a lot, or you compete with paladins, like DPS and tank paladins, and you compete with casters for gear, meaning that you have a extremely high amount of infighting for gear, and you're not doing DPS, so you can only do so much. So you're fighting for gear with your DPS, which means that you don't get the privilege that tanks do, where they can, just generally get away with getting most of their gear, at least in dungeons, because there's only one tank. And there's a lot of the best tank gear does not work on other builds at all, so they can easily get their gear. So, in a moment, I'm going to go into the solutions I have for it. There's 4 that I managed to come up with that were fairly simple. And this will actually lead me to announce a new series I might be doing in the background, just to, have some fun, whilst I'm working on more serious videos. With that being said, though, let's go into our solutions. Okay, now on to our solutions. So, I've come up with 4, just off the top of my head, that were fairly... They weren't overly hard, and they weren't overly easy, but these were what I think would be some of the best solutions. So the first one, this will be the one where I show you guys a little bit of a spoiler as to what I might be doing in the future whilst I work on other content. Whilst I'm working on it, this will be like filler. Add more healing classes, or add more classes in general to the game. Now, these can be after we get DKs, this can be even before. Essentially what this is, just make new characters, like make, I don't know, grid, I guess, let's just pull something from Diablo 3 as a joke, Witch Doctor. Put one of them, similar style to Shaman, but instead it's much more dark. Well, what do you do? So, there's just one big thing out the way, is just make more healers. The more healers there are, the more diversity you're going to get out of them, and the more mix and matching you can do. Secondly, and this is probably going to be the easiest one, and maybe the one that they would take if they take my video seriously, rework or give us new REs for healers. Specifically, this will tie into my last point as well, which will be make more healing builds make more hybrid builds viable. And what this means is make more REs that allow you to do like these weird things. So like, I don't know, make like a paladin one where hitting we're hitting with melee triggers a buff that will allow you to, upon getting 5 stacks, heal people as you, or even just make it to where, I don't know, like each time you hit with a melee ability, you can heal nearby allies for up to, I don't know, for 25% of the damage dealt by that attack. And then every time you cast a judgment, or anytime you cast judgment, consecrate, or I don't know, just something other, some other good paladin holy spell, maybe like Avenging Wrath, you will place a buff on friendly allies that will heal them for 30% of their maximum HP, and this will be over over like 10 seconds or something like that. So that way, now you're getting hots, you're healing everybody, and you're healing pretty effectively. There's a good way to make a hybrid build. DPS that can also heal fairly effectively. And this can go into other things too, like just giving healers maybe more synergy, or allowing, like, maybe a nature holy build to take over, where you can have, maybe healer, your holy heal spells have their reduced casting time. Yeah, their cast time is reduced and their healing is increased, equal to the number of healing over time effects on the target you're casting too. That would be a really cool one. Just stuff like that that would fix the main issues. And finally, this is the last one. I think this one's also fairly easy. Simply put, add new abilities, add new specs, add new talents. Simply put, once we get to Wrath, unless they go to Cataclysm, which I don't think they should, maybe go to Cataclysm, but after that, you're kinda just, you no longer have what you want, in terms of an actual system. So once we get to either Cataclysm or Wrath, whichever way they end at, just like I said with characters, start adding more stuff. And if you really want to be, like, hilarious about it, maybe, make it to where you can do quests to give yourself extra stuff, or maybe, take fan-generated ideas, turn them into new content, and do stuff with that. Obviously, that's a huge endeavor. I'm not going to tell people that they have to do that, but these are just some suggestions for the developers, and for people who want to tell the developers, since this is my opinion on this subject. Yeah, so those are the three big solutions that I found for, if you consider the fact, just fixing hybrid classes, but that sort of ties in with the REs and other stuff. And so, what is the whole takeaway from this? The main takeaway is that healers right now are in a state where they are they're fun to play, but they get boring very, very fast. They require a lot of effort to make. They compete a lot with characters that do other things than them, and they are not very well balanced in Ascension. And what they really need is, they need an introduction of new things to mess around with. Like I said, new characters, more talents, maybe even new specs within those, sort of classes. Or they need to rebalance things to make it to where more builds are viable at higher tiers of play, without just, having them be in the standard archetype of holy hots or nature. Like, give us, like, some ways to mishmash stuff a lot better. With that being said, though, that's really all I have to say. As for my little sneak peek announcement, I will be, since I said we are adding characters, or that they should add characters, I'm going to be working on a few videos here and there, and every now and again there'll be like a little mini-series here, where I'm going to essentially pick a character. It could be, just like a common trope. It could be, like, even the Witch Doctor. That might even be, like, the first one I choose to do, and then just essentially make 3 specs, make some of their abilities, give them a main idea around what their spec does, and then talk about, maybe some talent ideas, maybe some REs that could work, and yeah, that's really about it. With all that being said, though, this is Desmond of Desmond Ascension. Thank you all for watching. Like and subscribe if you do enjoy this type of content. I will be making some guides as well at some point. Just hold off for now. I want to try and get my content a little bit better quality before I start doing that. And I'll be seeing you guys all later.